everybody a heads up about that too. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to Lisa and John. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jean. Just kudos to Dorothy. We had our professional at Johnson Photography. We used their services just a couple of weeks ago for our professional photos. So shout out to them. They're chamber members, and we're just grateful for what she did. So good to be with you all this morning. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about who we are and what we do. Jean, you mentioned that we are certified social emotional intelligence coaches. Just real quick, we specialize in organizational development with an emphasis on creating healthy work environments. Pre-COVID, as we often said, we were riding the tide of helping businesses to move along and make that transition between the intergenerational, some of the challenges that they faced with moving from one culture to another. As we know, that has created a certain level of complexity as the business culture has shifted and businesses are trying to figure out how they not only retain talent, but also keep employee engagement, productivity high, as well as increasing their revenue streams. So we help with all of that through executive level coaching, training, as well as assessments. And so if you'd like more information, we would love to be able to chat with you more. Today we're going to talk about, as Jean said, this is really a burning topic, and one of the things that we've noticed in the last almost 3 months now is that there has been a significant amount of effort put into the return to work initiatives around the physical workspace with personal protection devices and such, and all of the preparations that companies are making. But one of the places that, and we had this conversation with Jean, and she's aware of it as well as she's been interacting with her chamber members, is that there has been very little effort and initiative put on providing support, emotional and psychological and social support for the workforce. We don't think that's necessarily meant to, intended to be a place in which it's avoided intentionally, but it has been, and the physical is just as much, or at least the emotional and psychological is as much important as it is with the physical space. So that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. Feel free to jump in and dialogue as we move forward with the information that we're sharing. This is meant for you. It's not all about us, and we definitely don't want this to just be a lecture as we explore this together. And then, of course, after the presentation is over with, if you'd like to connect and have further conversation about some of the information that we shared, we'd love to be able to do so.
Thank you. So welcome to Crazy Town, USA, everyone. The past couple months have absolutely seemed like the rug has been pulled out from underneath our feet, and everything that we have known that was familiar has now seemed unfamiliar. Have any of you felt like that? We've talked to so many people over the past couple of months as Jen and I have been doing our work, and everyone keeps using similar words. I feel like I don't know what normal is anymore, or now we're having to find a new normal, or everything seems surreal. I can't believe what is happening in the world. So we are all creatures of habit as human beings. That's where we find our safety in knowing what we know and the repetition of routines. And when that gets disrupted, our safety as we know it becomes very unsure, and it kind of upsets our apple cart, if you will, and people are thrown into a state of hypersensitivity and of panic and of more intense emotions. So we're all trying to figure out where do we belong? Where do we go? Where can we find a sense of safety and security in a world that we really don't recognize anymore? So, you know, from our experience of going to the supermarket to our experience of what work used to look like and feel like, to what our social lives used to look and feel like, everything has changed.
So just a little bit of a review on where we've been. And I got to move this screen out of my way so I can actually see our presentation. So as you remember, March 13th was when we found ourselves in the place of experiencing the lockdown. And that was the day that really life as we knew it and know it began to change. And so one of the things that we became very conscious of from the very beginning is that it started to impact our lives both personally and professionally. And as a result of that, there were certain emotions that came about. So we want you to just think about that right now. We understand very fully, and we've heard on multiple occasions that the new norm is not a term that is well accepted in the midst of COVID-19. But nonetheless, there are certain emotions and experiences that we now face and did face even at that point in time that changed how we felt about life, both personally and professionally. So, hold on, I'm sorry. We've got this screen that's in the way. There we go. So we would like to just take just a couple of moments to think about and reflect on that as a group. What were some of your initial feelings, both personally and professionally? And then we're going to move into the question of what were those things that you were hearing out of your workforce as March 13th kind of rolled around and the impact of COVID-19 began to impact our lives both personally and professionally. So if you want to just go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to jump in at this point.
Well, I'll start because I have a new last name. I had to call off my wedding on Friday, March 13th, which I may not be a fan of March or the Friday the 13th anymore because that just but that really kind of, for me individually, set the tone of the rest of the lockdown. Like, all right, well, this is, I had to call off one of the most major events of my life. This is clearly going to impact me in many, many more ways than what I had anticipated, because luckily I work for such a supportive financial institution or organization. They gave me, like a 4-day weekend just to like digest it all, because it's a lot, because you're kind of in shock for a minute. And then I realized throughout this process, I find myself more or less in survival mode because I had to do such a big decision so early on that since then I'm just like, all right, what do we need to do to get to the next day, to raise the bar, to do the next level? And it's nice now. I feel like we're a little bit more out of survival mode and coming back into a routine that we can adjust to. I will not call it a new normal, but a routine that we can switch to, because we absolutely are creatures of habit. And
correct. Excellent. Yeah, you definitely took a huge impact, Ashley. Yep. That was a big. In fact, I think you ended up getting married in your living room, right?
I did, barefoot in my living room. Yep. Made it work.
Yeah. Who else would like to share how you felt the initial impact, both personally and professionally?
My name is Sarah, and I am at a credit union, and my initial worry was not for me personally or the people in my household, but it was fear that I would get sick and impact my staff and their families.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Totally understandable, yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. We know firsthand both personally and professionally, that the impact that it had on both of us was pretty significant. That week, we had 3 huge meetings scheduled with, one was a tier 1 supplier, and we had been working on that relationship, and that, of course, was canceled, and indefinitely. The work of moving forward with an initiative has been put on hold. So that was devastating to us, and naturally so. I have an 18-year-old with a disability, and his educational program was put into our lap on that particular day with some level of support from our educators, who have just been phenomenal. So we just want you to process that, and that's why we're bringing that up this morning. We don't want to just move on as if things are just going back to a place, but it's important to be able to think about and process, how were we feeling and how are we feeling now, both personally and professionally. And in the same way, and we're going to say this time and time again throughout our presentation, is we have to create space for our workforce to be able to have the same opportunity to be able to share and process what they were both experiencing personally and professionally. So we'd love to be able to hear right now, what were you hearing out of your workforce from March 13th on?
I'm just having a hard time with my computer. So I guess speaking from just my like individual little world, it was within 24, and I think Sarah, you had said you're at a credit union as well. Within 24 to 36 hours, we instantly had to have our call center remote. We had to do so many things that had to happen in such a short period of time that again, I go back to being in that survival mode that we, you know, it wasn't necessarily that we had time to even process like, oh, what's happening. It was like, no, you have to get set up at home. You have to get, you know, on the phones. We have to make sure our members get taken care of because, you know, we all know the 2 main stressors in life are your health and your finances. Well, the last thing we want to do is finances onto the plate when health is already the major issue. So for us, it was members first, head on, and we all jumped on board. And I think now we're getting to a point, and Sarah can attest to this as well, where we can kind of reflect and make sure that we're all good. Everybody's settling down. You know, everybody's, you know, kind of working with what we have. Not that we're doing appointments in our lobby. But that initial was just like, it spiraled. It had to move very, very quickly in a very short amount of time.
I love hearing, Ashley, that you mentioned a couple of sentences ago is that you're now as a workforce being able to process, and that's extremely important. And we want to reinforce that mentality is, again, creating opportunities for the workforce collectively, personally, in some fashion or form, and whatever works within the culture and the climate of the environment that represents your company, is that you're creating spaces for you to be able to hear their voices and to help them to be able to verbalize what they're experiencing, not only now, but what they've been through. Anybody else want to share what you have heard out of your workforce?
I'll just
Okay. Go ahead.
Just quickly, you know, one of the things I think that it's so unprecedented what we had to go through and experience, and just knowing what the, you know, the members' initial reaction was, and then our staff having to navigate the response. You know, obviously everybody knows that we tend to have a much, as far as our Auburn Hills Chamber goes, a younger staff, but very responsive. But it's the unknown and what do you say? And the interesting thing is, it's not just, you know, they ask the question, what do we say? And none of us really knew what to say. And so it was just seeking out the right resources and trying to figure out the right responses based on experience that no one has. And I think that that was just a big, you know, it's funny because on your daily stress levels of just your normal things that you have to deal with, that was a huge change. You know, it couldn't figure out why you were so tired all the time, right?
Yep.
Or you'd hear about maybe somebody who got sick or some situation with a family, and it was just escalated so much more than what normally you would have experienced. So that was a big shift. So
Yeah. Thank you, Jean.
As we kind of unpack all this stuff this morning, the one thing to keep in mind is that first and foremost, as human beings, we are creatures of emotion first and logic second. So even though we you know, all of us here are professionals and we understand the responsibilities that go along with carrying out professional obligations, we can never minimize the impact that this kind of stuff has on us. So Jean, with you just saying that, you know, you just felt so tired, emotional stress is very fatiguing because we're trying to work through our daily responsibilities, but yet all of a sudden we have this big like elephant in the room, which it's called COVID-19, and none of us knew how to handle that. So there's really three elements that we have had that have surfaced as a result of COVID-19. Crisis, trauma, and grief are what every single one of us are experiencing on some level or another. So when we break these down, crisis, it's a time of intense difficulty, it's trouble or danger. So if you think about, you know, when COVID first came in and the danger was, oh my gosh, we could get sick, or someone we love could get sick, or our coworkers could get sick. The trauma was our lives have been disrupted. There was no way around it. Every single one of our lives have been disrupted. And then grief, there is very much a large grief element that has come into play here, because in our society, we are taught that grief is the physical loss of a human being. But what we actually know is that grief is multifaceted, and it can be many different forms of loss. So I'm thinking about you, Ashley. You know, I'm sure you and your precious new hubby had this wonderful wedding all planned out that you had been looking forward to, and a beautiful gown and all of these things that were going to make your day just absolutely perfect. And then when you can't carry out that beautiful day in the fashion that you meant it to occur in, there is a loss that, you know, I don't want to speak for you, but that I'm assuming had to happen. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely. I would even, you know, continue on like you had just said. It was, I didn't realize it at the time, but I actually had to grieve the situation in order to really move forward from it. You know, I will absolutely have my dream wedding next year and all of that, but it was, you know, grieving the loss of the fact that I didn't get to have that on the day that I'd been looking forward to for over a year. But it's going through those steps and realizing, you know, it's okay to realize that grief doesn't mean that somebody died. Like, you can feel grief over a situation, which I guess before this, I really hadn't experienced some level in my lifetime. So, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it brings up a very valid point with this particular, the nature of crisis, trauma, and grief, Lisa, as you were talking about it, is keeping in mind, both for ourselves and for our workforce, that this is not subjective, but that it's very personal. And so it's really based upon how we see the reality of the situations and circumstances that we're going through. It's not based upon how we think other people should be responding to it. And so that's going to look differently for each and every one of us.
So to kind of wrap crisis, trauma, and grief up in like a little package, if you will, we take that package and we pass it around a room, and we have to understand that every single one of us have been impacted by what has happened. Every single one of us. So even those that you may be looking and saying, gosh, it looks like Dan over here is really handling this well, or it looks like Jane over here is just completely falling apart. Even though we see two different people that seem at two opposite ends of the spectrum, we have a myriad of people that are in between that are all experiencing different things. So a lot of times it's what we don't see, what is not being said, what is not something that the visual, our eyes can detect. So loss for all of us has happened. This is very multifaceted. We can be going about our day and there will be a trigger that can send us back to what it felt like when this first went on. And we have to realize the depth of what this does to us. So as you think about coming back together in a brick and mortar fashion with your coworkers, understanding that this has impacted them mentally, physically, socially, spiritually. So every single part of who makes us up, from a very individual standpoint, has been impacted.
So we want to dig down just a little bit deeper in this regard, and kind of pull apart the different layers and levels that have been impacted for us, both personally and professionally. Last week we had a Zoom meeting with a CEO of a logistics company out of Texas, and we were having this conversation about the impact that it's had upon his 8,000 employees. And of course, they sent out a survey asking very poignant questions about how the virus has impacted his workforce and the lives of those that he's leading. And a lot of the information that came back, and it was a light bulb moment for him, is he said, I should have known that the impact and the experience that I was having as a professional, both personally and professionally, was also having an impact on my employees. And many of the areas that were brought up were categorized in these three particular areas. So as we know, here in Michigan, there's been an incentive with unemployment, but even at that, it has compromised the financial health and the well-being of many families. Some of those individuals that we've been in contact with have lost jobs, have been laid off, have been put on furlough. Some have taken a hit and have either voluntarily or been forced to have a cut in pay to be able to maintain the financial health of the business. And so, of course, that creates a certain level of stress. Ashley, you talked about that with your workforce, is that multiple layers and levels of what they were experiencing. One of the concerns that you had was that they weren't going to suffer from this financially. But the fact is we do know, first and foremost, that this has had a huge impact. 25% of our workforce in the United States has been laid off. That's where our unemployment is at right as we speak, and is continuing to change. Health issues, of course, were compromised, not only by the virus and the people who were diagnosed with that, but as we also know, because of the nature of the healthcare system, people in some cases had reservations about going in to be seen for other conditions that they were facing, and or some of those elective surgeries that they had previously scheduled to be taken care of were put on hold. And so there's another layer of our own personal health. So not just from a medical standpoint, but one of the things that we heard time and time again is that with the closing of gyms and the ability for people to be able to get out and get some exercise and to be able to attend to their physical well-being was being compromised as well. And then lastly, of course, is the lifestyle. Prior to March 13th, our families, Lisa and her husband and myself and my wife and my son, we remember that last Friday when we were able to go out with friends and go to one of our favorite dining places and have drinks and share a dinner. And little did we know on that last Friday that life was going to change for us as well. And so it's that compromised experience of being around people that we care about, of being able to socialize, of being able to go to, as you mentioned, Ashley, your favorite bar and the place where you hang out. That's not something that can be taken lightly. That's something significant that really impacts our emotional and psychological health. So it's keeping those things in mind and going back to that conversation that we have not only in our private circles socially, but also in the work environment, is again creating space for those conversations to take place, so that we're able to get a pulse on where our workforce is and help them process the impact that it has had upon them personally. Because we do know that the impact that people experience, both personally and professionally, will ultimately impact their productivity.
So there's 2 A's for every single organization that we want to make sure we are being mindful of. The first is acknowledging what has happened. So we don't want to minimize it. This has been really, really significant. So yesterday I was talking to my brother, and he made the comment that, my gosh, who would have thought that, we've had COVID-19 and we would have something even larger than COVID-19 to take away the news story that's happening from COVID-19. So we've gone from COVID into the situation of social unrest in our world. This is happening globally. So we are living in a time that is absolutely changing radically, and all of us are trying to figure out, what is happening and where do we find our normal. So we can't minimize the impact that is happening on us or on the people that we are going to be working with. So the way we do that is we become aware, and this is a big part of social and emotional intelligence. It's being aware at all times of, what am I feeling in every single moment as I work through the day, and also being aware of what those around me are feeling. So trying to step back and say, all right, I see that this person over there is pretty quiet today. I wonder if something is wrong with them. I'm wondering if, they're stressed, or if they're preoccupied, if they're fearful about coming back into the work environment. So we have to make sure that we have this heightened level of awareness. And then also to remember, once again, we're going to sound like a broken record, but we have to make sure that this is so clear that every single one of us will respond differently. And there's no right or wrong with that. We want to make sure that we are giving people permission always to respond the way that you need to respond. And I'll caveat that with, as professionals, we want to make sure that we are responding in ways that we are treating each other with respect and with a level of grace and kindness, but also understanding that because we are unique human beings, that we will all respond differently. So when we all come back together in the work environment, we are going to see a mixed bag of people coming back in carrying many different emotions in their bag on where they're feeling about coming back into work.
So just a couple of things, and we would love to be able to have you weigh in on this, to consider. Apart from the the physical aspect of how your company is responding to this, because, and we don't want to make light of this, because the physical impacts the emotional and it also impacts the social. So all of it works together systematically to create an environment of health. So all of these components need to be in place. But we would love to be able to hear some feedback on how is your organization, how is your business, how is your company responding and addressing the impact that COVID-19 has had upon your workforce emotionally and psychologically and socially. What are you doing before they enter, and what are the plans that you are putting in place in order to create space and opportunity for them to be able to be taken care of emotionally after they return?
I'd say at the Royal Park, the biggest thing we've been doing is bringing everyone in, just sort of showing like how we are aiming to protect them and keep them safe. And we're really putting a focus on letting them know that like we're here for them. I mean, this time is about them being safe, them feeling comfortable, because like serving tables and all that kind of like stuff of that nature. I mean, some people are definitely hesitant out there, and just knowing that there are difficult customers right now, and difficult people, and people that just want to sort of walk the line, where you might have a customer that doesn't want to wear a mask and then they feel uncomfortable. So we're just trying to let them know that we are 100% fully here for you no matter what. As much as it's the customer number one mentality, I think right now we're sort of saying you as the employee, you're number one right now, because your safety is everything to us. And that's sort of that confidence we're trying to give the staff. I don't know if we've really addressed like the issues during like a shift. If someone's really struggling emotionally, I think I don't know if there's a plan in place for that, but I think there's a team of leadership that would, I feel confident would hopefully address that and be there for them. But that's sort of where we're at right now.
Michael, are you all having more frequent staff meetings than you have in the past, as you allude to those conversations that you're having with your workforce?
Yeah, I know the restaurant general manager, they have additional leadership in place, and they're meeting before every single shift. I guess we haven't really decided how we're going to meet during the shift, because it just like we soft opened last night, so I'd have to pay more attention. Unfortunately, it's not really my I don't really work within the restaurant, so I don't get to see it live in action. But I know pre-shift, like, everyone's talking and just sort of trying to make them feel safe and secure. And I think before they came back, everyone sort of met just to make sure, just to again let them know everything that's in place so that they're safe, and like why we do what we do, why we're using paper menus, why we're using QR codes and that kind of good stuff. So I'm sure we can probably step it up in some areas, I would imagine.
You made an excellent point though, Michael, in terms of you brought in the component of your customer base. That's another level of impact that it's having upon businesses. So not only is the workforce processing their own experiences, but you poignantly said in a very succinct way of how are our guests responding. I was actually at Menards a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not going to share exactly what was said because it was so offensive. But I was talking to a security guard at the front door who I know personally, who actually happens to be law enforcement as well. And so he's doing this as a side job. And I said, how are you doing? He's like, stick around for 5 minutes. He says, you're going to see what we've been dealing with. And within 5 minutes, this guy comes in, and of course, Menards, agree, disagree, whatever, has a zero tolerance policy of having to wear a mask. And he politely said to the gentleman, sir, I just want to let you know that as you enter, you have to have a mask. That's our policy. He was really polite about it. And there were certain words that were said at that point in time, as well as a physical gesture that was offered to the security guard. And so it's the conscience.
That's a nice way to put it. It was offered to the security guard.
Yeah. So So just being conscious of the fact that that all of us are dealing with psychological and emotional trauma, and some of us deal with it in very appropriate ways to respect other people, but in the same regard, there's going to be others that don't, and that has a huge impact on our staff as well. Other things that you're doing to be able to address the impact that it's had upon your workforce?
You know, I'll chime in. I think one thing happened yesterday within Chief that kind of I didn't realize until this webinar. We have to, you know, we're all being flexible. We're all doing a lot of the other duties as assigned in our job description, really trying to come together as a team. And there was one employee that we had to have moved to a different area, and this employee was upset about it, and none of us could really understand, well, why. You're doing the same job, just literally down on one floor. But now listening to this and going through this, well, that one level of control that she had of her area, like that's her thing. So I can understand now why there was such an unrest within her, because she consistently gets to come in, sit at that same spot, do her same job, and that's what she can rely on right now in a world that you don't know anymore of what's going to happen and things like that. So I guess I didn't realize that yesterday, and I was just like, because again, when it comes to adaptability, I'm like a jellyfish. I could do whatever, but there are absolutely other people that change is very, very hard, and that should be taken into consideration. And I think even down to those minimal levels, we don't realize it right now. When has that ever mattered, you know? So yeah.
And we know you, Ashley, to be your EQ is definitely high, and as we've gotten to know you, we've appreciated that about you. So one of the things that, as an illustration to this, might be beneficial for all of us is revisiting that conversation. You know, Jennifer, I noticed yesterday when we had this interaction that you were really struggling, and there was a reaction that came out. And I just want, without judgment, I just want to understand a little bit more on what were you feeling and experiencing? Why did that bother you so much? And what can we do to be able to help this become a little bit more comfortable? So being able to create that space again, I know we're being redundant, but that's so important, particularly at this time, is creating space and opportunity for people to be able to say what they need to say and what they're thinking and feeling without feeling judged and ostracized.
And I think that has to happen individually as well. Like, I think when we think about having these spaces and this thing, it has to be a big group discussion. And sometimes those conversations are best had, like that particular incident would be best had on an individual level, because, it's obviously not a desk and a chair that was the issue that we've all, we can all realize that. So I think when people think, creating these places to speak and stuff, it can literally just be two people. It could be one person just giving themselves a moment to reflect throughout their workday. It doesn't have to be a big, large group of people, which is also something I kind of assumed in my mind, that we all had to kumbaya and come together. But, you can have more individualized personal conversations. So yeah, that was a big one too.
Excellent. So just as a last point is just think about how will your organization move forward. And in the interest of time, we would love to be able to have further conversation about that. Just as much as there has been task forces put in place to deal with the personal protection devices and how you're going to move forward physically, we are advocating for putting together a task force that will address the emotional and social health of the workforce as well. And that's one of those things that we can help you navigate through with your companies. So there's more conversation that could be had with that.
So we just want to be mindful as the employees start coming back into the office. There are going to be a roller coaster of emotions that you are most likely going to be seeing from one end of the spectrum to the other. So go to the next chart, John. So this chart is up here because depending on how a company has handled, communicating with the employee base before and during COVID, is going to be instrumental in what kind of employees they see coming back into the work world. And I'm going to give you a very uncomfortable example of something that when I heard this go down, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to be easy when these employees come back into the workforce. Small family-owned business. They've been around for over 80 years. They've always treated their employees really, really well. COVID hits. There's only one communication that came out from the owners during the time of COVID. And during that time, the employees were told to stay home for a 3-week period. And during that time, they were made to use their PTO time. So they were not allowed to apply for unemployment. They were made to use their PTO time. So these employees now, when they come back into the office, are coming back in with a lot of anger, with a lot of, I can't believe they made us take our vacation time. So they're going to have to make some amends with their employee base because of how they laid this out. So just be very mindful of what happened during COVID, how your company rolled this all out is absolutely going to be an indicator on what you get back into the office. So in the same vein, when we look on the other end, there's going to be organizations that are going to have to make amends. There's also organizations that are celebrating that, boy, we laid everything out really, really well. And I'll give you another very quick example of this is a small family-owned business. They probably have about 100 employees. They were able to allow their employees to apply for unemployment when it was time to bring them back into work. They gave them space to identify how they were feeling about coming back into work. And then they were also, and once again, this is from one company to another, but they were in the financial position that they were able to offer their employees a bonus to be able to return to work. So they're getting employees that are, coming back in saying, oh yes, I'm eager to come back to work. I am glad to be able to come back to work. And I am grateful that I have this opportunity of receiving a bonus. So 2 starkly different examples, but both companies are going to be getting radically different employees coming back into the workforce.
And also being conscious of the fact that this was a new experience for all of us. And so acknowledging the fact that inevitably, as sharp as a business model as we might have had, and as much pride as we might have taken in leading our business forward, is there are inevitably going to be mistakes that have been made and will continue to be made as we move forward. So it's taking the personal responsibility of acknowledging the places, as Lisa, you were talking about, where we missed the mark, being honest about that, coming forward, making apologies where it's necessary, and demonstrating that, but also making it clear about the places that we've done really well in being able to provide for our employees. Because as is naturally the case, it will impact productivity and the overall health of the work environment.
So just continue to keep in mind that the stress, even though we're coming back into work, it hasn't gone away. So there's still talks about, people are calling this a depression, they're calling this a recession. The stock market, although it's rebounded, there's talks about a second wave if COVID hits again in the fall. What's going to happen then? We know that there's stark differences in our world, especially, actually in our country. Let's just keep it here with how this COVID response has been handled. So understanding that, from one person to another, once again, there could be radical differences in your workplace of who believes it was handled correctly, who believes it was handled terribly. We know that people are still, carrying a great level of fear about possibly catching COVID and passing it on to someone. And then here's another big thing. We see this all the time in business offices. There is still a significant stigma that is associated with identifying that we are feeling anxious as human beings. So we don't want to discuss our mental health. We pretend like everything's fine. But John and I, in the coaching work that we do in businesses, I can't tell you how many times after I've actually been able to establish a relationship of trust with one of my coaching clients, that it comes out that they are dealing with a heightened level of anxiety, so much so that they're on medication. So I have been kind of carrying those people on my heart right now, because I know that, my gosh, these are people that have suffered from anxiety before COVID. So now I know that going back to work is going to mean that they are going to be dealing with a lot of more COVID. So this is going to be exhibited with a lot of physical reactions. So if you hear people that are complaining about, I'm not able to sleep well, I'm dealing with backaches, my stomach hurts, I've been eating too much or too little, pay attention to that, because that's one of those, warning signs that's going up in a big way for you to grab onto.
I would also add, just as a side note real quickly, we have seen, and we know just because of the nature of the work that we do, and possibly many of you have heard, is that domestic violence numbers have increased. And so keeping that in the back of your mind and being conscious of what's happening in your workforce, of just keeping tabs on what you're seeing with some of your employees, with those that that have trouble at home, and those that you're maybe unconscious of as well. Just another layer of support. So just real quickly, just thinking about that, leaping off of where Lisa was talking about, is making no assumptions. Let us not draw quick conclusions based upon what we're seeing and experiencing. I'll tell you a quick story to illustrate this. We have a contract with a tier 1 supplier. They have a phenomenal HR department. We have a wonderful relationship with them. They're leading in a very progressive way. But as we were making our rounds with our businesses that we serve and our clients, we had a conversation with this HR director, and she said, I am up to here with hearing about how afraid my workforce is to come back. And it was actually took us off guard, because that's not traditionally how she would respond. And so in regards to that particular mentality, is that she was making the assumption, and she said this, she's like, I'm fine, I feel good about being back, I just don't understand why people are so afraid to come back into the physical workspace. We know her, and we're not judging her response. We understand that that was her way of reacting, because it's creating another layer of stress. But making no assumptions that if one employee is feeling this way, there's going to be other employees that are diametrically in a different place. So keeping that in a conscious state of understanding that people are responding differently. So let's talk real quick about, in the time that we have left, just some toolbox mentalities, some things that you can take away from this conversation and apply as a leader into your workforce and into the organization that you're leading.
So the very first thing that we know that all of you have done and your organizations have done, because this is mandated, is there is a level of reassurance that has been put out there on how you will handle keeping your employees physically safe. So, it goes from, social distancing in the work environment, to whether or not you have to wear PPEs, to how you keep your work environment sterile. So that is something that every single business has to have laid out, right? So you keep those guidelines out everywhere where the employees can see that, they're discussed, they're reassured, but we always bring the people back to, here's what we're doing to keep you physically safe. So there's that reassurance that we keep out in front of everyone. But that needs to be followed up with the emotional side, the side that we can't see. So here's when, Michael, and I love that you said that Royal Park is a place that you feel that if an employee was feeling worried or concerned, that they would be able to express that and they would be heard. So we love that language, but we would probably even push you to take it a step further. And we would say, we don't ever want to assume that. So what that means is we open up dialogue, just like we have done with, here's how we're going to keep you physically safe. Here's how we're going to keep you emotionally safe. And we start using words like, we empathize with how difficult this situation has been. Tell us what it's been like for you. So perhaps one of the ways that you can start creating dialogue is if you have weekly meetings with your staff, part of your communication plan can be giving them some space to express what this has been like for them personally and professionally. So kind of just like we did at the beginning of this webinar. So you allow them the place to verbalize how they're feeling. So name your emotion. And then you let them know that, you know what, we are here together in a work environment to care for each other, to support one another, not only as coworkers, but as human beings. We care about each other and our families. So we want to stress the human element of this as much as possible, because that builds loyalty and it builds people that say, you know what, I want to be a part of this organization now more than ever because I really, really feel that they care about me. This isn't just lip service. I really feel that they value who I am as a human being. So we really want to make sure that this is just as big of a part of your return to work initiative as keeping your employees healthy.
With the time that we have left, is that all right?
Yeah.
Jean, I don't know how you're set up on your end. We definitely want to create some dialogue, and in respect out of people's time, we appointed this for an hour. But is it perfectly acceptable, Jean, or do you need to go as far as the meeting with Zoom, that we could create an opportunity for dialogue? If people need to leave, they can feel free to do so, or if people would like to stick around and have further conversation, we're willing to give them that time as well. Where are you at with your time, Jean?
Oh yeah, we have plenty of time. So I'd say, you know, like you suggested, if for those that may have to go, certainly welcome to do so. And then, you know, at least another half an hour if needed, if you wanted to carry on with the conversation.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Does anybody, for those that need to leave immediately, do you have any particular questions with the information that we shared? Or anybody for that fact that is just wanting to jump in and dialogue on some of the information that we shared that needs to be digested a little bit further?
I thought the information was amazing. I think it's there's so much right now that could be going through so many different people. There's all different types of situations, and I think you touched on it well. I mean, just like myself, I struggle because I'm the only person that was brought back in my department, and I feel freaking guilty that I'm the only person in the corporate thing. So there's so many different ways that this information can be valuable to everyone. So I thought it was awesome, guys. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you,
Michael.
Michael.
Yeah.
So, John and Lisa.
Yes, Peggy Berry Bartz.
Well, I've been listening, and you guys are spot on with understanding that everyone is in a different place, and not everyone speaks out loud with what's going on. And so, because I think in pictures, I'm going to share my picture. in the world of musicians who work in churches, I still have a ton of friends, and I watched all the dialogue that went on back and forth between them. And the gamut from angry to, I don't think anybody was in an acceptance mode whatsoever. And everybody's trying to figure out what to do. And we're all walking on what I call fog or clouds. There is no ground beneath us right now, other than the sun comes up every morning and the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And we don't have any solid ground to like, we also cannot plan for the future because we don't know what's going to happen. And we are never been in a position like this before where we can't plan 2 weeks in advance. I mean, we can try, but that everyone is like ungrounded right now. And the only thing solid is the floor beneath your feet. But as soon as you walk out in the world and you have everybody's anger and everybody's understanding and acceptance, and, you know, the guy at Menards, who knows what's going on in his life?
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be told what to do, but
Exactly.
you could kill somebody if you don't wear a mask. And so I have gone every gamut, and I found myself being angry a lot. Angry just because people are not thinking the logical part of being safe and keeping everybody happy. And how do you know that if you're a restaurant employee or employee at Menards, someone's not going to walk in and give you something? So there's no safe ground anymore. And that's really, really tough. And we have to keep continuing to ask the questions. You're going to get different answers from introverts and extroverts. Most of the introverts are thrilled to be working at home because they don't have to deal with anybody. They don't have to be afraid because they're in their own space.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's another layer of complexity, isn't it, that you mentioned. And as we had that conversation with that CEO of the logistics company in Texas, is that he says, you know, I really am tempted to just throw a anonymous survey out there of who just wants to stay home because they're enjoying working from home. He said, and I would bet that the vast majority are there. And he said, and I'm willing to flex and flow with that. We're willing as a company to be able to create that space to do so. But one of the things that I think, Peggy, you touched on that is so important, and Ashley, as she was talking about her wedding date and all of the hopes and dreams around that, and the grief, we appreciate it if Ashley's still with us or not, but regardless of that loss that she had experienced, is anger is a huge part of grief. It's part of the loss. And it's actually the early stage of the grieving experience, is just that feeling of rage and frustration and anger, because life as we know it is no longer what we had hoped it would be.
right.
One of the things that we can suggest for helping to kind of allow your employees to work through the anxiety of the unknown. So Peggy, you mentioned the unknown. And so we're all in that same boat where we don't know what is going to happen, what's going to happen in the fall.
Yeah.
So in the work that John and I do, we talk about ways to keep anxiety at a place that we are managing the anxiety, not the anxiety managing us. And one of the little tools that we use all the time is we talk about living in the present tense. So that means that we speak our truths for what we know today. So what do we know today? Well, as John and I are sitting here presenting, and I can see a window in front of us, it's a beautiful sunny day. So Peggy, as you said, the sun has continued to rise and set each day during this really crazy time that we're in. So the truth is there is that normalcy that we have been able to count on. The other truth is, for those of us that are healthy, we can say, I am healthy today. I have my health today. And then you go through, who are the loved ones that I want to make sure are healthy, and you name them off. So, and hopefully, you know, everyone that's here, I hope that you can say that as well. But, you know, my family is healthy. And then you start listing your coworkers. Are my coworkers healthy? Do we have some semblance of business starting to get back to usual? What am I doing today in my work world? well, I'm doing this and this and this. That's my truth for today. So you start listing out your truths for today, your truths for the moment, and that helps us put ourselves in the driver's seat and feel that we have a greater level of control of what's happening. So it allows us to not project into the future and say, you know what, I am just going to really work on today, and I'll deal with tomorrow. So does that help?
Very much so.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Any other points of question or dialogue? Or things that you'd like to, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you all were talking about the things to consider, and then actually Lisa came back and mentioned it a little later on anyways, and that is among our reopening plans and among our conversations with our staff, our superiors and our customers in our case, should be a discussion of what happens if we were to see a spike in cases, and if we were to see that feared second wave, which may occur in the fall. I mean, we've seen what's happened in some of the larger auto plants. They get one case, they shut everything right down again. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know. But the point is, they had a process in place to deal with it. Just something, and I know that came up in a meeting last week, and when the person threw that out, we were stunned. I mean, none of us, I don't think we wanted to even think about that. Not that we hadn't, it's just we didn't even want to consider that possibility after what we've just been through and still coming out of in the last 3 months.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know what, and that's an excellent point. And here's where the reassurance comes into that. And here's how I would actually unpack that is, because we've already gone through this once, we do have plans in place. So do any of us want this to come back again? No. So we can acknowledge that. But the fact is, we do know what we have to do in the event we see a resurgence. So that does provide a level of comfort from a safety standpoint. It's not going to be anything that we want to hear or deal with, but I think we have to drive back the focus on we know what we have to do. We did make it through this. This isn't fun. It's not pleasant, but there is a resiliency that we know that we all have at moving through this. So that is a good thing. When we talk about grief, the journey of grief is always the most painful the first time we go through it. So if you think of the first time we went through COVID, this was really, really gosh darn hard. So if we have to go through it again in the fall, yeah, it's going to hurt again, but it's not going to be to the same level as it was this time. That's if we follow the true model of how grief works. We will have developed coping mechanisms. And now I'm going to speak to the mental side of it, mental health side of it, and emotional health side of it, is once we move through the trajectory of grief, we develop coping mechanisms, and those don't go away. They become enhanced when we get triggered and go back into our grief journey again.
Who was speaking, by the way? I'm sorry. Was that you, Drew?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. We didn't see your picture, so.
Gotcha.
And who are you with, Drew?
I'm a business services coordinator with the Pontiac, Michigan Works office.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong camera. Sorry. Pontiac, Michigan Works office.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. Yep. And I love that point that you made too, Drew. Just, that's another layer. I mean, this thing is such a huge ball of yarn that's intertwined of not only are we dealing with the past, and a lot of us want to psychologically just move on and say, okay, so restaurants are open again. I'm able to get a haircut in 2 weeks, so everything's going to go back to normal, and that's the desire for all of us psychologically and emotionally and socially. But then there's also those that are living with the angst and the stress and the anxiety of the fear of what potentially could happen if this thing comes back again. So, as leaders, and that's why, we with Gene and Auburn Hills Chamber put this together, is because this is such a complex conversation that has to be had. And there's so many different moving parts that can't be controlled and can't be predicted. But as Lisa said very, very well, is we need to be in the place in which we're responding rather than reacting. As much as we can drive the ship and be in a place of leadership, it's going to be better for our organizations and ultimately the employees that are serving us, the most valuable part of our resources. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Drew?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay, excellent. We'll turn it back over to you, Gene, if you have any closing comments.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Lisa and John, for all of your insight. And I have a page of notes over here. Definitely just been taking a lot of notes as far as, we are going to be moving back into the office in the next couple of weeks here. And I, anticipate that these conversations are ones that are going to need to be had with everyone.
Yeah.
And especially also with, talking to the members moving forward too. So thank you so much. This has been.
No, thank you.
And we'll have this on our YouTube page if anyone is interested in forwarding it and sharing it on. And thank you again.
Thank you all. We appreciate your time this morning, everyone. Stay well, enjoy the sunshine today, soak up some of that warmth out there.
Take care, friends.
No doubt. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah,
Okay,
you
you
too.
too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.